When a decorated cop's unchecked rage leads to the assault of an elderly black woman, he's forced to face the harshest consequence of all. Her son is the new chief of police. Malcolm Turner, a rising reformer, must now decide if his fight for justice can include mercy for the very man who shattered his family. As the city ignites with outrage and protests, these two men, one haunted by his past and the other driven by a future cut short, find their lives intertwined in unexpected ways. With reputations, legacies, and an entire community at stake, can redemption truly come from within? Or will justice demand a price too steep to bear? In a shocking twist that redefines the meaning of forgiveness, The Reckoning Within explores whether the systems we've built can ever be reformed, and whether the hearts of those within can truly change. Detective Marcus Harlow is a man defined by his past, a decorated police officer who has never questioned the lines he's crossed in his career. But when a routine call spirals out of control, Marcus finds himself in a confrontation with Viola Turner, an elderly black woman whose life he shatters in a moment of unchecked rage. What he doesn't know is that Viola's son, Malcolm Turner, is the newly appointed chief of police, the man now holding Marcus's career and future in his hands. Malcolm Turner has dedicated his life to reforming the system from within, striving to right the wrongs he grew up witnessing. When his mother becomes the victim of an officer's violent prejudice, Malcolm faces an impossible decision: seek revenge against Marcus or use this moment to expose the cracks in the very system he now leads. As the city teeters on the edge of unrest, Malcolm finds an unlikely ally in Marcus's estranged daughter, Maya, a passionate civil rights activist determined to bring real change. But as secrets from the past surface, including a moment of mercy that once spared Malcolm from Marcus's wrath, Malcolm and Marcus's lives become deeply intertwined in ways neither expected. Now, with their careers, reputations, and families at stake, both men are forced to confront their own failings and decide what justice really means. In a stunning twist, Malcolm reveals that his fight for reform goes beyond professional duty. It's personal, and time is running out. The final reckoning will test not just Marcus's ability to change, but the entire city's capacity for forgiveness. A gripping tale of courage, The Reckoning Within asks, can a man haunted by hate find redemption? And can a system built on inequality ever be reformed from within? In his early 50s, Marcus is a tall, muscular man with a rugged face weathered by years in the police force. His graying hair is cropped short, and his piercing blue eyes convey authority but are often clouded with resentment. Marcus grew up in a predominantly white, working-class neighborhood, raised to believe in toughness and discipline. After serving in the military, he joined the police force, where he thrived in the tough-talking culture. Over the years, his prejudices became deeply ingrained, especially as he rose through the ranks. Estranged from his activist daughter, Maya, Marcus believes in order and control above all else, until the incident with Viola Turner forces him to confront his beliefs. Malcolm Turner. In his early 40s, Malcolm is tall and lean, with dark olive skin and short hair streaked with premature gray. He has a composed but intense demeanor, his sharp eyes always focused and thoughtful. Malcolm was raised by his single mother, Viola, in a close-knit black community. He worked hard in law school, becoming known as a fierce advocate for justice. Rising quickly through the ranks, Malcolm earned a reputation as a reformer within the system, challenging police misconduct at every opportunity. His appointment as chief of police is the pinnacle of his career, but when his mother is assaulted, he must battle personal and professional turmoil, questioning whether the system he has worked so hard to change can truly be saved. Maya Harlow. In her late 30s, Maya is of average height and slim build. She has curly dark brown hair that she often wears in a natural afro, and her expressive brown eyes show the fire of her convictions. She typically dresses in comfortable yet stylish clothing, often wearing protest gear or community-centered symbols. Maya grew up watching her father, Marcus, enforce laws that she believes are rooted in systemic oppression. After clashing with him over her values, she left home to become a civil rights activist, working tirelessly to advocate for marginalized communities. Maya is known for her bold and outspoken nature, organizing protests and rallies. Despite her estrangement from Marcus, she is drawn back into his life when she learns of his assault on Viola, determined to ensure justice is served. Viola Turner. In her early 70s, Viola is a petite but resilient woman with soft, wrinkled brown skin and short, silver-gray hair. Her warm, gentle smile belies a fierce inner strength. Viola was a beloved teacher in her community for over 40 years, raising Malcolm alone after her husband passed away. Known for her wisdom and kindness, she has been a quiet but powerful figure in the neighborhood, nurturing countless children. The assault shatters her sense of security and puts her son Malcolm in direct conflict with the very institution he worked to change. Key settings: Marcus's house, a modest, one-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, filled with symbols of Marcus's past. Military memorabilia, old police awards, and a gun safe hidden in the closet. The space is tidy but cold, reflecting Marcus's rigid and organized personality. The lack of family photos hints at his fractured relationship with his daughter, Maya. The police department, a large, imposing building with a sterile atmosphere, bustling with activity. The department is a mix of old-school police culture and Malcolm's attempts at reform, evident in the tension-filled hallways and closed-door meetings. The shadowy, fluorescent-lit interrogation rooms become key locations for confrontations. Viola's neighborhood, a historically black neighborhood with narrow streets lined with small, colorful homes. Viola's home is warm and inviting, filled with family photos, books, and plants, showing her connection to the community. Their neighborhood, though rich in culture, suffers from neglect, underfunded schools, and frequent police surveillance, deepening the city's racial divide. The community center, a vital hub in the neighborhood. The community center is where Maya often holds her activist meetings and where Malcolm reconnects with his roots. The building is simple but vibrant, with murals on the walls celebrating Black history and culture. It is a place of hope and resilience, often hosting youth programs and social justice events. City Hall, a sleek, modern building that represents political power in the city. It is the setting for press conferences and high-stakes meetings between Malcolm, the mayor, and other city officials. The contrast between the clean, polished interior and the community's struggles outside its walls creates a stark visual metaphor for the disconnect between leadership and the people they serve. The hospital, a key location in the wake of Viola's attack. The hospital becomes a place of waiting and emotional reflection for Malcolm and Marcus. The sterile clinical environment reflects the tension between life and death, safety and harm, and serves as a reminder of the vulnerability of those caught in the crossfire of systemic injustice. The fallout title, Ripples, Malcolm in the hospital, where Malcolm sees his unconscious mother. Malcolm learns from the doctor that Viola has a concussion and facial injuries. Anger boils within him as he listens to the details. He demands answers from the officers outside. Malcolm's need for answers sets him on a path to discover Marcus' involvement. Marcus in the police department, Marcus in a locker room. Marcus arrives at work the next morning to a cold reception. He avoids eye contact with his fellow officers and tries to act as if nothing happened, but the tension is palpable. A higher-ranking officer pulls him aside and informs him that the incident has reached Malcolm's desk. Marcus' fear of confronting Malcolm pushes him further into denial, setting up the confrontation. Malcolm learns the truth. Police department. Malcolm arrives at work and watches the video for the first time, learning that it was Marcus who assaulted his mother. Malcolm is stunned and briefly overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the situation. He struggles between his desire for justice and his need to maintain his composure as a leader. Malcolm's discovery ignites his conflict between personal and professional responsibilities. The confrontation, Malcolm's office. Malcolm demands a private meeting with Marcus. In a tense exchange, Marcus tries to justify his actions, but Malcolm seethes with rage. Malcolm gives him an ultimatum: resign immediately or face an internal investigation. This confrontation sets the stakes for Marcus, whose guilt and defensiveness begin to unravel even further. The video goes viral. Title: Unmasked. The video spreads online and in the media. The video of Marcus punching Viola explodes on social media, sparking protests and outrage across the city. News outlets pick up the story, fueling public anger against the police. The public backlash increases the pressure on Malcolm to act decisively, complicating his emotional journey. Maya's reaction setting. Maya's apartment. Maya watches the video in horror and fury. Although she has long been estranged from her father, this incident cuts deep within her. She begins to organize a protest, determined to make her father an example of the systemic issues she has been fighting against. Maya's decision to protest heightens tensions between her and Marcus, bringing the family drama to the surface. Marcus confronts the media, the police department. The department holds a press conference, where Marcus is questioned by reporters. He makes a cold, measured statement, deflecting responsibility. Malcolm watches from the sidelines, horrified by his lack of remorse. Marcus's deflection worsens public opinion and further alienates Malcolm, leading him to take drastic action. Viola wakes up in the hospital. Viola wakes up, groggy and confused. Malcolm is at her side. Although weak, she tries to downplay the incident, encouraging Malcolm not to let his anger consume him. Her calm demeanor contrasts with Malcolm's internal rage. Viola's calm influence serves as a counterbalance to Malcolm's growing emotional turmoil, challenging him to seek a path other than revenge. Protest and pressure title. Divided loyalties. Maya organizes the community center. Maya speaks to a group of activists about the need for systemic change, urging the community to take a stand. She struggles with the internal conflict of protesting her own father's actions, but believes it is necessary. Maya's activism heightens the tension between her and Marcus, setting the stage for the inevitable confrontation. The protest begins in the streets outside the police department. Protesters gather outside the station, chanting for justice. Maya leads the crowd, and Malcolm watches from his office window, torn between his duty as chief and his personal connection to the movement. The protest forces Malcolm to decide whether to support the public or fulfill his duty as police chief, adding layers to his internal conflict. Marcus confronts Maya, the protest scene. Marcus, trying to sneak out of the police station unnoticed, encounters Maya, who is leading the protest. In a heated exchange, Maya accuses Marcus of being a symbol of everything that is wrong with the police. Marcus defends himself, but Maya refuses to back down. This confrontation deepens the rift between father and daughter, pushing Marcus closer to the brink of collapse. Personal tensions title. Family fractures. Malcolm's dilemma. Malcolm's house. Malcolm speaks with his counselors about how to handle Marcus' situation. His mind is elsewhere, distracted by his mother's recovery and his conflicting feelings about Marcus. Pressure mounts to fire Marcus, but Malcolm is unsure if this is the best course of action. Malcolm's indecision foreshadows his struggle to balance personal feelings with public duty, leading him to drastic measures later. Maya's reflection setting. Maya's apartment. After the protest, Maya reflects on her relationship with her father and wonders if confronting him publicly was the right choice. Although she remains committed to the cause, she is emotionally torn between her anger and the faint hope that Marcus can change. Maya's reflection adds depth to her character and sets up her role in later events, where she may consider reconciling with Marcus. The decision title. Lines drawn. Scene 1. Malcolm's ultimatum. Malcolm's office. After days of deliberation, Malcolm meets Marcus again. He gives Marcus one last chance to quietly withdraw or face a public inquiry that will likely ruin his reputation. Marcus is stunned, feeling betrayed by someone he once considered a soft reformer. Cause and effect. Malcolm's ultimatum forces Marcus to make a life-changing decision, causing him to reflect on his actions and his future. Marcus's breakdown. Marcus's house. Alone at home, Marcus drinks heavily, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of what he has done. He watches the video of the incident again, unable to recognize the man he sees on the screen. For the first time, Marcus begins to doubt the values that shaped him. Marcus's breakdown signals a turning point in his character arc, setting him up for potential redemption in future chapters. Redemption and reform title. A new path. Marcus reaches out to Maya, Maya's apartment. Marcus swallows his pride and reaches out to Maya, asking to meet with her. Maya hesitates, but agrees. At their meeting, Marcus admits that he is beginning to question his past actions. Maya listens, unsure whether to trust him. This attempt at reconciliation sets up Marcus's potential role in larger reform efforts later in the novel. Malcolm and Marcus's new partnership setting. Police department. Malcolm, reluctantly seeing Marcus's willingness to change, proposes an unprecedented solution. Marcus will remain on the force, but will publicly advocate for police reform. Marcus is surprised by the offer, but sees it as a chance to redeem himself. Cause and effect. This scene establishes the partnership that will drive the plot forward toward the novel's resolution, with the two men working together to reform the system. Plot twist and legacy title. The last fight, Malcolm's secret at the hospital. Malcolm receives news that his terminal illness has worsened. Realizing that his time is running out, he becomes more determined to leave a lasting legacy. He confides in Maya, revealing his illness for the first time. This revelation adds urgency to Malcolm's desire for reform, prompting him to take bolder action. City Hall public announcement. Malcolm and Marcus hold a press conference, announcing a new initiative for police reform. Marcus stands before the city, acknowledging his past mistakes and vowing to work alongside Malcolm to dismantle systemic problems. This moment signals a shift in both men's journeys toward redemption and justice, culminating in the novel's emotional climax. Bittersweet resolution title, Legacy, Malcolm's farewell setting. Malcolm's home. As Malcolm's health declines, he watches the seeds of reform take root. He spends his final days with Viola and Maya, reflecting on his life and the impact he has made. Malcolm's death marks the emotional resolution of his arc, but the reforms he initiated continue to unfold. Marcus' new role, police department. Marcus, now a public face of reform, works closely with the community, including Maya, to enact lasting change. He remains haunted by his past, but is committed to being part of the solution. Marcus' transformation is complete, showing the power of responsibility and redemption. Detective Marcus Harlow shifted uncomfortably in his squad car, the leather seat squeaking beneath him. It was late evening, the kind of night that made the quiet of the city feel heavier than usual. His shift was almost over, but as always, the calls didn't stop. He glanced at his watch, his jaw tightening. Another disturbance in Viola Turner's neighborhood. He sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "Why always this place?" he muttered under his breath. Viola's neighborhood had a reputation, one that Marcus didn't care for. Teenagers causing trouble, people screaming in the streets, just another night in his eyes. The dispatch crackled through the radio, giving him the details. Disturbance on 5th and Oak. Elderly woman arguing with a group of teenagers. Neighbors are complaining. Marcus rolled his eyes, his hand already moving to flick on the lights of his squad car. He knew this call would be trouble. It always was in that part of town. The neighborhood had been in decline for years, and Marcus believed that some places, some people, just couldn't be helped. He stepped on the gas, already envisioning the encounter. It wouldn't be the first time he had to teach some respect to those who didn't know their place. A few blocks away, Viola Turner sat on the porch of her small, well-kept house. The air was warm, and she was enjoying the last bit of twilight as she thumbed through a worn book, her favorite escape. The sounds of teenagers' voices rose from the street corner, where a group of boys were laughing and teasing each other. Viola smiled softly to herself. She knew them, had taught a few of them years ago. They weren't trouble, not like the people outside the neighborhood imagined. Setting her book aside, Viola stood and walked to the gate. The teenagers quieted as she approached, out of respect. "Y'all keep it down now, here? Don't need Mrs. Thompson calling the cops again," she said, her tone gentle but firm. The boys nodded, one even offering an apology before they moved a little further down the block. Viola nodded back, satisfied. As she turned to go inside, her phone vibrated in her pocket. Malcolm, her son, checking in as he always did. She smiled as she texted him back. She had no idea that her peaceful evening was about to be shattered. Marcus arrived on the scene, his squad car coming to a stop with a sharp squeal of brakes. He stepped out, surveying the group of teenagers down the street, his hand instinctively resting on his holstered gun. His eyes narrowed. "Hey, break it up. Let's go, get moving," Marcus barked, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of everyone in the vicinity. Viola, still near her gate, frowned. She hadn't expected the police to show up so quickly, and certainly not with this level of aggression. The teenagers hesitated, unsure of what to do. "They ain't doing nothing wrong, officer," Viola said, stepping toward Marcus, her voice calm. But Marcus wasn't listening. His focus was on the group of boys, a simmering anger rising in his chest as they failed to disperse as quickly as he wanted. He stepped closer to them, towering over Viola, dismissing her presence entirely. "I said move it," Marcus shouted, ignoring Viola's attempts to intervene. "Officer, they aren't causing any trouble," she repeated, a hand reaching out to touch his arm, trying to calm him down. The simple gesture, meant to de-escalate, only ignited something in Marcus. In one swift motion, before he even realized what he was doing, Marcus's fist connected with Viola's face. The crack of the impact echoed down the street, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Viola fell to the ground, her small frame crumpling against the pavement. The teenagers froze, their eyes wide with disbelief, and then all at once, chaos erupted. One of the teenagers, his hands shaking, pulled out his phone and hit record. Marcus, breathing heavily, stared down at Viola, his mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. The blood on her lip, the confusion in her eyes as she struggled to sit up, none of it made sense. "You hit her!" one of the boys shouted, stepping forward as the others began to yell. "Get back!" Marcus shouted, but the panic was rising in his voice now. He looked around, seeing the phones pointed at him, recording every second of this disaster. His heart raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had just wanted to get control of the situation, and now... The teenagers yelled louder, some of them shouting into their phones, calling for help. Marcus glanced around, his mind spinning as he realized the gravity of what he'd done. Across the city, Malcolm Turner was unwinding after a long day, his phone resting beside him on the couch. He had just finished a call with one of the city council members about upcoming reforms when he saw the text from his mother. It was simple, just to check in to say she was going to bed soon. Malcolm smiled to himself, replying quickly before turning back to the news on TV. The debate over police reform was intensifying again, as it always did. But tonight, for some reason, he felt a sense of peace. The reforms were slow, but they were happening. His mother was safe, the city was manageable, and for a moment, everything seemed under control. The phone on the couch buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a call, and Malcolm's heart sank as he saw the hospital's name flash across the screen. Back on 5th and Oak, the chaos continued. A second squad car pulled up, and officers rushed out, taking in the scene. The blood on Viola's face, the screaming teenagers, and Marcus standing frozen, looking like a man who had just woken up from a nightmare. One of the officers grabbed Marcus by the arm, pulling him aside. "Get out of here," the officer hissed. "This is bad, Marcus. You need to go." Marcus blinked, shaking his head as if trying to clear it, but the reality of what he had done was beginning to sink in. His career, his life, it was all hanging by a thread now. He turned, walking back to his squad car in a daze, his hands trembling as he reached for the door. Behind him, the teenagers continued filming, their voices rising with anger as they shouted at the retreating officer. Malcolm was already out the door, his heart pounding in his chest as he listened to the nurse on the other end of the line. His mother had been assaulted. She was at the hospital, unconscious but stable. The details were sparse, but Malcolm's mind was already racing ahead. He didn't wait for the full explanation. He grabbed his keys, his stomach twisting with fear. His mother, the woman who had survived so much, had been attacked. And in her own neighborhood, no less. As Malcolm sped toward the hospital, the thought of who could have done this flickered in his mind, but nothing could have prepared him for the truth. Marcus sat in his squad car, the weight of what had happened pressing down on him like a boulder. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. He couldn't bring himself to face the world, not yet. The video was out there now. He knew it. His career, his reputation, it would all be over soon. He drove home in silence, his thoughts a whirlwind of excuses and justifications. It had been a mistake, a terrible mistake, but deep down, Marcus knew this was more than just one moment of lost control. This was the culmination of years of anger, years of believing he was in the right. As he sat in his driveway, staring at the darkened windows of his house, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to come crashing down. And it wouldn't just be his career, it would be his soul. The sterile lights of the hospital flickered overhead as Malcolm Turner pushed through the swinging doors, his heart racing. The nurse on the phone had said assault. He couldn't stop the knot of dread from tightening in his stomach. His mother, Viola, the woman who had raised him, who had survived everything life had thrown her way, was in a hospital bed because of someone's violence. He strode down the hallway, his long legs eating up the distance. A nurse spotted him and hurried over, recognizing the intensity on his face. "Mr. Turner, your mother is stable, but she's been through a lot," the nurse began. But Malcolm didn't want the usual clinical talk. "What happened?" he asked, his voice flat but full of restrained fury. The nurse hesitated, flipping through her notes. "She has a concussion and some facial injuries. We believe she fell after being struck." "Struck by who?" Malcolm cut her off, his eyes narrowing. He could feel the familiar fire of rage rising in his chest, the same anger that had driven him to law school and into the fight for justice. His mother, struck by someone? It was impossible to reconcile with the image of the warm, nurturing woman he'd left at home just hours ago. "I don't have all the details," the nurse said carefully, her eyes flicking toward the door of his mother's room. "But the police are here to answer any questions you have." Malcolm clenched his jaw and turned on his heel, striding toward the group of officers huddled at the end of the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, like he was walking through a nightmare. He'd spent years working with officers, fighting to reform the system from the inside. Now, here he was, facing the very people whose badge had become synonymous with violence. Across town, Marcus Harlow walked into the police department like a ghost. The previous night's events replayed in his mind, each frame more vivid than the last. He couldn't shake the image of Viola Turner crumpling to the ground, the blood on her lip, the sound of his fist connecting with her frail body. It echoed in his skull. His fellow officers avoided eye contact, and whispers followed him down the hallway. Everyone had seen the video by now, and the tension in the department was palpable. Marcus felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on him, all waiting to see what would happen next. He made his way to his locker, head down, desperate to avoid conversation. But before he could escape into the relative privacy of the room, a sergeant stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Harlow," the sergeant said, his voice low, "you know what this is about." Marcus grunted in response. He knew all too well. "The incident's already on Turner's desk," the sergeant continued. "You're going to need to face him sooner than later. Might as well get it over with." Marcus's stomach twisted. He hadn't thought about Malcolm Turner until that moment, the new chief of police, the man tasked with leading the force into a new era of reform. And now Marcus was about to go toe-to-toe with him, knowing full well that the woman he had assaulted was Turner's mother. He nodded curtly and shoved past the sergeant, his hands trembling as he fumbled to open his locker. He wasn't ready for this. Not even close. Back at the hospital, Malcolm's pulse pounded in his ears as he confronted the officer in charge of the investigation. The officer's face was grim as he spoke, confirming Malcolm's worst fears. "It was one of ours," the officer said quietly. "Marcus Harlow." Malcolm blinked, his body going rigid. He knew Marcus Harlow. Everyone in the department did. Harlow had been around for decades, a veteran of the old school, the kind of cop who believed that respect was earned through fear. Malcolm had crossed paths with him a few times, but never like this. "Harlow?" Malcolm's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. There's video footage of the incident. It's already making the rounds on social media." Malcolm felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. His mother, a woman who had given her life to this community, who had believed in Malcolm's work, had been assaulted by one of his own officers. The betrayal ran deep, not just as a son, but as the chief of police. He nodded slowly, the rage inside him turning cold and sharp. "I want to see the video." The officer hesitated, but Malcolm didn't leave room for argument. "Now," he commanded. They led him into a small room where a laptop was set up. As the footage began to play, Malcolm clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He watched as Marcus struck his mother, watched her fall to the pavement. Every frame of the video cut into him like a knife. The man he was supposed to lead, the man he had trusted as part of his department, had done this. By the time Marcus arrived at Malcolm's office later that morning, he was already drenched in sweat. His nerves were shot, and he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Every step he took toward that door felt like a march to the gallows. When he knocked and entered, the room was heavy with silence. Malcolm sat behind his desk, his face like stone. He didn't offer Marcus a seat, and the tension between them was electric. Marcus cleared his throat. "Chief Turner, I—" "Shut up," Malcolm said, his voice icy. "You don't get to explain." Marcus flinched but remained standing, his mouth dry. Malcolm rose from his seat, his hands gripping the edge of the desk as he leaned forward. "You hit my mother, Marcus." "My mother?" Malcolm's voice was controlled, but the fury beneath it was unmistakable. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't mean to," Marcus started, but the words felt weak, pathetic, even to his own ears. "You didn't mean to?" Malcolm snapped. "You didn't mean to assault an old woman? That's what you're telling me." Marcus swallowed hard, his mind racing for something, anything, that would make this better. But there was nothing. He'd crossed a line, and he knew it. "I messed up," Marcus said quietly, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I know I did." Malcolm stared at him for a long moment, his eyes burning into Marcus's skull. "You're going to resign," he said finally, his tone brokering no argument. "Effective immediately. If you don't, I'll make sure you're dragged through every disciplinary hearing, every court, until there's nothing left of your career." The ultimatum hit Marcus like a freight train. He had expected anger, but not this. His entire life was on the line now. His career, his identity, everything he had built over decades on the force. But even as the weight of Malcolm's words settled on his shoulders, Marcus couldn't argue. He didn't deserve to. "I'll turn in my badge," Marcus muttered, his voice barely audible. Malcolm didn't move. He didn't acknowledge Marcus's surrender. He simply sat back down, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "Get out of my office." Marcus left, feeling as though the walls were closing in around him. Outside, Marcus barely made it to his car before his phone began buzzing nonstop. News alerts, text messages, social media notifications, it was all too much. He turned his phone on silent, but it was too late. The video of his assault on Viola Turner had gone viral. His face was plastered all over the news. The headlines screamed for justice, for reform. The city was already buzzing with the possibility of protests. People were angry, and rightfully so. He sat in his car, staring blankly at the steering wheel. He wasn't just losing his job. He was losing his life as he knew it. The Marcus Harlow of yesterday, the tough, no-nonsense cop who commanded respect, was gone. Now he was just another name. Another symbol of everything that was wrong with the system he had been part of for so long. Across town, in her small apartment, Maya Harlow sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone in disbelief. She had watched the video 5 times now, her stomach turning each time. Her father, the man she had been estranged from for years, had done this. He had struck an old woman, Malcolm's mother, of all people. Maya's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. The activist in her wanted to take immediate action, to rally the community and demand justice. But the daughter in her, the part of her she tried to bury long ago, felt sick with shame. How could her father have become this man? How could the person she once looked up to fall so far? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. This wasn't about her. It wasn't even about Marcus anymore. This was about a system that had allowed people like him to thrive, unchecked and unchallenged. She had a responsibility now, not just to the movement but to herself. She couldn't let her father's actions go unanswered. With newfound determination, she grabbed her phone and started making calls. It was time to organize. The morning sun cast a pale light over the city, but it didn't bring any sense of calm. On every street corner, in coffee shops, on buses, people were staring at their phones, their expressions shifting from shock to disgust as they watched the video. Marcus Harlow's face was now plastered across every screen, the clip of him striking Viola Turner looping endlessly. Social media exploded. Twitter threads filled with outrage, demanding justice. Hashtags like #JusticeForViola and #HarlowMustGo trended within hours. News outlets picked up the story quickly, airing the footage on every major network. Commentators dissected every second, The image of Marcus's clenched fist and Viola's fall repeated in slow motion. As the video continued to go viral, the city began to feel the undercurrent of unrest. Protests were forming, small at first, but growing louder with each passing hour. In Malcolm Turner's office, the phones were ringing nonstop. His staff rushed around, trying to handle the fallout as best they could. But no amount of spin could contain the damage. Malcolm stood at his window, watching the city below. He'd seen this before. Violence captured on camera, communities on the brink of an explosion. But this time it was personal. This time, it was his mother lying in that hospital bed. His mind raced as he contemplated his next move. The public wanted blood, and they had every right to demand it. But could justice be served without tearing everything apart? In her small, cluttered apartment, Maya Harlow sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone in disbelief. She had been scrolling through social media when the video had first appeared on her feed. At first, she hadn't believed it. She clicked on the video with a mixture of morbid curiosity and dread, but as soon as she saw Marcus's face, her father's face, she felt sick to her stomach. The woman in the video, lying on the pavement with blood on her lips, wasn't just another victim. It was Viola Turner, Malcolm's mother. The weight of it hit Maya like a tidal wave, threatening to pull her under. She stood up abruptly, pacing around her small apartment, the flood of emotions overwhelming her. Shame, anger, disgust. She had long since distanced herself from Marcus, but seeing his violence laid bare like this brought back all the years of disappointment, the years of watching him justify his actions in the name of order. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was a text from a fellow activist, asking if she had seen the video and if she was planning on organizing a protest. Maya stared at the message for a moment, her mind torn in two directions. Part of her wanted to ignore it all, to pretend that Marcus wasn't her father, that his actions had nothing to do with her. But the other part, the part of her that had spent years fighting for justice, for the people the system failed, knew that this was her fight, too. With a deep breath, she typed out a quick response. I'll organize. Meet me at the community center tonight. She couldn't sit on the sidelines. Not this time. By late afternoon, a crowd had gathered outside the police department. What had started as a few dozen people quickly swelled to hundreds, their signs raised high, voices chanting in unison. Justice for Viola. No more police violence. The rhythmic cries echoed off the concrete buildings, growing louder as more people joined the protest. Maya stood at the front, a megaphone in hand. She led the chants with a fierce determination, her eyes scanning the crowd. It was larger than she had anticipated, and growing by the minute. The energy was palpable, righteous anger, frustration, and a deep-seated need for change. But there was something else simmering just beneath the surface. The tension in the air felt thick, and Maya knew all too well how quickly protests like this could spiral out of control. She had seen it happen before. One wrong move, one spark, and the situation could erupt into violence. Still, she stood her ground, her voice steady. We are here to demand justice, she called through the megaphone, her words carrying through the crowd. We are here because the system has failed us again. But we won't be silenced. The crowd roared in response, their fists raised high in solidarity. From his office window, Malcolm watched the protest unfold. The sight of the crowd stirred something inside him, a mixture of pride and dread. These were the people he had fought for, the people his mother had spent her life teaching and caring for. They were demanding justice, and he understood their rage. He shared it. But Malcolm also knew the risks. As chief of police, he had to balance his role as a reformer with his duty to maintain order. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. If the protest turned violent, it would be his job to stop it. And if he didn't act, the department would turn on him. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. One of his aides stepped in, looking nervous. Sir, the mayor's office is on the line, the aide said. They want to know how you plan to handle the protest. Malcolm nodded, but didn't answer immediately. His gaze returned to the crowd below. His mother was still in the hospital, and the man responsible for her injuries was still walking free. How could he focus on anything else? While the city buzzed with the sounds of protest, Marcus sat at a long table in the sterile conference room of the police department. A small group of reporters sat before him, their cameras and notepads ready, waiting for him to speak. He had no choice but to face them. The department insisted that he address the growing outrage publicly. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled the notes in front of him, though he wasn't planning to read from them. His mouth was dry, and every word he tried to rehearse in his mind felt hollow. The cameras started rolling, and Marcus leaned forward toward the microphone. "I want to address the recent incident that has led to this media firestorm," he began, his voice monotone, as if the words weren't truly his. "As a police officer, I've dedicated my career to protecting this city. What happened the other night was unfortunate." The room was silent, the reporters hanging on every word. "The department is conducting an internal investigation, and I will cooperate fully. I deeply regret that the situation escalated as it did. It was never my intention to cause harm." It was a carefully crafted statement designed to deflect and downplay. But Marcus could see the reporters' faces hardening. They weren't buying it. He didn't even believe it himself. The questions came at him quickly, cutting through the empty speech he had just delivered. "Do you take responsibility for your actions? Will you resign? Do you think your actions reflect the systemic issues in the police force?" Each question hit him like a blow, but Marcus kept his face stoic. He gave the same hollow answers, trying to sidestep the truth of what he had done. But the truth was already out there. It was playing on every screen, on every feed. No amount of deflection would stop it now. Back at the police department, Malcolm sat in his office, staring at his desk. His mother had woken up briefly in the hospital earlier that day, but she was still weak, her words slurred from the painkillers. She had told him not to let anger consume him, but Malcolm wasn't sure he could follow her advice. He had tried so hard to change the department from within. He had worked tirelessly to implement reforms, to push for accountability. And yet here he was, sitting behind the desk of a broken system that had allowed his own mother to be harmed. The phone on his desk buzzed again. The mayor's office, no doubt wanting answers. He let it go to voicemail. He knew what needed to be done. Marcus Harlow had to go. There was no other option. But could Malcolm take action without letting the situation spiral out of control? If he fired Marcus without due process, it could blow back on him, undermine everything he had built. His mind raced through the possibilities. The protest outside was growing larger, more restless. If he didn't act soon, the city would erupt. But if he acted rashly, it could fuel the fire even more. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The weight of the world seemed to be pressing down on him from all sides. Outside, the tension in the crowd was growing. The chanting was louder, the signs more defiant. Protesters filled the streets, blocking traffic and demanding answers. Maya could feel the shift in the air. What had started as a peaceful protest was threatening to turn into something much more dangerous. A group of younger protesters at the edge of the crowd began arguing with the police officers who were stationed nearby. The officers, nervous and on edge, had their hands on their batons, ready for the worst. Maya pushed through the crowd, trying to get ahead of the confrontation. "Stay calm," she shouted through the megaphone. "We're here for justice, not violence." But the crowd was too charged, the anger too raw. A plastic bottle flew through the air, hitting one of the officers on the shoulder. The response was immediate. Officers began pushing the crowd back, shouting orders. The protesters resisted, their chants turning into cries of defiance. The peaceful protest was on the verge of collapsing into chaos. Maya felt her heart racing, the fear clawing at her throat. She had seen this happen before, and she knew what could come next. Riot gear, arrests, violence. As she tried to regain control of the crowd, she caught sight of someone pushing through the protesters. Her breath caught in her throat.